Cheat, 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 cheat.
What's up, guys? It's your boy Benny. I just got back from a long flight yesterday, a 5-hour flight across the country. Now, I never got a chance to look in the cockpit. They close those doors pretty tightly these days, but I gotta tell you, if I had opened the door up just a crack and had looked in and seen the pilot drunk, blacked out with the helmet on, drooling on the stick, then I would have probably been really scared. I wouldn't have liked to have that be the person who's in charge of flying and landing the plane. I probably would have called someone and said, hey, FBI, FAA, federal marshals, whoever's in charge here, we got a problem. Ladies and gentlemen, when you look at American elections, it's about the same thing. You have the most incompetent, dumb running our elections, and they are deeply corrupt themselves. The people who are facilitating the election process are themselves corrupt. How deep does the rot go? Let me give you an example here, ladies and gentlemen. Here is a story from Washington, D.C. This is a story where an elected official has now been fined for voting in both D.C. and Maryland in the 2020 election. Vanessa Rubio told the D.C. Board of Elections she didn't realize it was illegal to vote in the district and in Maryland since D.C. is not a state. Oh my God. Ooh, they're not sending their best. An elected official in D.C. and 5 others were fined for committing voter fraud, the D.C. Board of Elections said. Vanessa Rubio, an advisory neighborhood commissioner for Ward 4, voted in both D.C. and Maryland in the 2020 general election, according to the election board. The documents, the board state Rubio voted in person in Maryland on November 1, and then in D.C. on November 2020. Were those votes counted? Of course they were. So she got to vote twice. She got to effectively cancel your legal vote. Rubio admitted that she voted twice to the board, but says she didn't think it was illegal because D.C. is not a state, according to the documents. My God. My God. She'll only be fined $500 because the narrative must be protected here. The narrative is that there was no mass voter fraud. But if elected officials are able to do this kind of stuff, then what could an actual criminal enterprise commit on the night of the election in the year 2020? The election board fined her $500. The 5 others who voted, 5 other voters who the board said double voted were ordered to pay lesser fines of $100 each, only $100 to rig an election. The board said it was ordered by Rubio to pay a heftier fine due to her position as an elected official. None of the 6 cases are related to one another, the official says. Must protect the narrative. The first case of voter fraud, the elections board has taken action since sharing the data with the Nationwide Election Registration Information Center. News 4 has reached out to Maryland Board of Elections to find out if they're taking any action. Double voting is not grounds to be removed from elected office in D.C. Washington, D.C. doesn't even have voter. You can stay an elected official if you commit voter fraud. It doesn't impact the person's right to vote in future elections. Oh, man. Oh, my gosh. So these are the people in charge. These are the people in charge. The ones who are in charge of our elections, our elected officials, are the ones committing fraud.
District official and 5 voters have been fined now for committing voter fraud. D.C.'s Board of Elections issued fines to 5 of the voters who the board says voted in Maryland and the district in the same election. 1 other voted in D.C. and Florida. News 4's Mark Seagraves broke this story on social media today that Vanessa Rubio, who is a Ward 4 elected advisory neighborhood commissioner, has been fined $500 for double voting in the 2020 general election. Now, according to findings from the D.C. Board of Elections investigation, Rubio told the board she didn't think it was illegal to vote in D.C. and Maryland since D.C. is not a state. Rubio declined to comment. None of the 6 cases are related. These are the first cases of voter fraud the D.C. Board of Elections has taken action on since sharing data with the Nationwide Election Registration Information Center, known as ERIC. News 4 reached out to the Maryland Board of Elections about any actions they might take. Double voting is not grounds to be removed from the elected office in D.C., nor does it impact the person's right to vote in future elections.
So nothing's going to happen. They get a $100 fine. For rigging an election, you get a $100 fine. How many evil, corrupt people would gladly pay that fine? hundreds of thousands of times over in order to have fraudulent elections. We must secure our elections. That is the point of stories like this. The only reason that you could vote in Washington, D.C., and I know this as a former resident of Washington, D.C., the only reason that this could happen is because Washington, D.C. has universal mail-in balloting. I, at my home in Washington, D.C., received at least a dozen ballots from people who were not me. Now, these are ballots of other American citizens. They are their sacred ballots, and I should have no right to ever even touch them or handle them. Yet, here is all these ballots sitting in a fat stack in my mailbox. I could have ripped every single one of them open, and if I were a corrupt person or a person who was being paid to do this, I could have just filled them all out and voted 12 times. If you have a secure election system, that can't happen. It's actually designed for corruption. The purpose of the system is corruption. That is the end goal. That is not the bug, it is the feature. Why else would I get mailed 12 ballots? How on earth can anyone justify that to me? And this is how so many people can vote in different states. Now, you wouldn't be allowed to vote in different states if it was just the little old ladies at the community centers running your elections, because they would match your voter ID with the balloting record, right? They'd give you your ballot, you'd go to the little booth, there's a guard at the door, and you vote, and then they watch your ballot get put into the box. That's how it's supposed to work. But it doesn't work that way when you mail everyone a ballot. And now the elected officials are straight up saying, I didn't even know. I didn't know. I couldn't do that. Tee-hee-hee, and nothing happens to them. I saw it for myself. So let's go ahead and see, what does that look like in practice? Well, CNN accidentally, in that same election in the year 2020, caught voter fraud, mass voter fraud happening on camera. They didn't want to do this, but they caught it anyway because it was so egregious and so open like a sewer.
Ballot drop box in Cuyahoga County, Ohio. You can see this woman right here casting her vote. Did you vote for Reagan or Jimmy Carter?
Carter.
Carter, okay. We don't want to get too personal with people here, but you can see there's
Look at the lady. Look at her. So here's the lady. By Ohio law, she's supposed to only have one ballot. Here she is with a stack of ballots. Look at that. Look at that. Look at that. It looks like the Publishers Clearinghouse. A stack of ballots sitting there, dumping them, shoving them into the drop box. Shoving them into the drop box. What does it look like when you mail people unaccountable ballots and you have no system in order to ensure that it's only that person that votes? Well, it looks like this.
Tells us he actually caught a woman on camera going into his mailbox stealing ballots. This is the Ring camera video appearing to show a woman taking out 3 ballots from a Lawrence man's mailbox.
Yo duré un tiempo esperando.
This is the man who didn't want to be identified, but says he went to go vote in person on Election Day last week and was told, according to the list, he already voted. That's when he checked his camera footage and then contacted police. The Essex County District Attorney's Office and Secretary of State, William Galvin, are now looking into any allegations of potential voter fraud.
Oh, did you find anything? Is the video camera evidence enough? In that same election, this is in Massachusetts, in that same election, there's a woman who walks in to vote, and they show her her vote. They're like, you can't vote, you already voted. They show her her vote, and it's not her signature. It's like, I didn't vote, and that's not my signature. And they're like, nope, sorry, too bad. Does that sound like the way that you want your elections to be run? And by the way, every single time somebody illegally votes, that's taking away a legal vote. That's defrauding you. That's defrauding your system. That's stealing your constitutional right. There is no graver crime. Let's go ahead and check in on some of the election headlines from across the country. So you don't even have to be a American citizen to vote in our federal elections in Arizona? What the hell kind of like clown farm are they running down there? Judge makes ruling in Louisiana throwing out an election, saying the election was so fraudulent and so many people voted that didn't have the right to vote or voted twice, like our story, that he had to throw out the election. Same thing happened in Connecticut, in one of the bluest parts of Connecticut, the most Democrat city in Connecticut, in Bridgeport. A judge threw out the election because the volume of ballots so mishandled is such that it calls into the result of the primary election into serious doubt. Elon Musk responding, judge orders new election in Connecticut town after surveillance video showed ballot stuffing in drop boxes. That this happens here is beyond a reasonable doubt. The only question is how common it is. Well, Elon, it's really common. Judges are now throwing out elections that are fraudulent elections across the country. In Iowa, an official's wife, again, an elected official's wife, has been found guilty on 52 counts of voter fraud charges. Could spend the rest of her life in prison. 52 counts of voter fraud charges, and guess what they were? Absentee and mail-in ballots, because of course. This back to Massachusetts, Springfield mayoral election in controversy over voter fraud allegations on camera. Here's this guy driving what looks to be new immigrants to the voter location and paying them to vote. Massive 2020 voter fraud in Michigan, including an estimated 800,000 ballot applications sent to non-qualified voters. Mail-in balloting is the devil. Voting machines in Pennsylvania trigger alarms ahead of 2024. What happened? The voter machines switched votes. This is causing a judge in Georgia to actually declare that electronic voting machines are unconstitutional. This is happening via an Obama-appointed judge named Amy Totenberg. She issued a 135-page ruling on a lawsuit saying that a state should ditch electronic voting in favor of hand-marked ballots. Wow. Unbelievable. So, what are we getting across the country? Stolen election after stolen election after stolen election. Blue state, red state, don't matter. Evil and corrupt people will take advantage of evil and corrupt systems. Paterson City Council president, this is in New Jersey, Paterson, New Jersey, and wife stole mail-in ballots to rig 2020 election. These guys are catching a massive case in the state of New Jersey. All Democrats in charge in New Jersey. Okay? Woman in Arizona admits to ballot collection scheme. They shouldn't have access to the ballots. Okay? It should be like Mission Impossible. If somebody wants to go in and steal a bunch of ballots, it should be like so highly contained and secured where the ballots actually are, but instead they mail them out. And so dumb low-level criminals like this lady, her name's Guillermina Fuentes, she can just go in and loot ballots from people. And that's exactly what she did. Same thing in Wisconsin, where Republicans are moving forward with articles of impeachment against their election administrator. This lady, a seething, unhealthy, unhappy Democrat, salty Democrat activist, well, she is potentially going to be impeached for unlawfully promoted maladministration with the use of ballot drop boxes and promoted and encouraged illegal alterations of absentee ballot applications during the administration of the 2020 presidential election. Well, there you go. There you have it. And the Heritage Foundation, of course, has their voter fraud database with all 50 states having voter fraud happening in them. When do we admit that this is a problem? Well, articles like this should really shock us into sobriety on this issue. 1 in 5 mail-in voters admit they cheated in the 2020 election. More than 20% of voters who used mail-in ballots in 2020 admit they participated in at least one form of election fraud. 19% of those who cast mail-in votes say a friend or family member filled out their ballot in part or in full on their behalf. Furthermore, 17% of the mail-in voters say the 2020 election they cast a ballot in a state where they no longer were a permanent. All these practices are illegal. So what happens next? Well, no one is quite sure. The best that you can do in my position is to bring light to this. Thankfully, we're not the only ones. Jesse Waters did an entire report on this. 20% of the voters were fraudulent or felonies. What a nightmare we are barreling towards in this country. We must fix voter fraud. We must fix it. Thank you for covering this, Jesse Waters.
Americans don't have a lot of confidence in our elections anymore. Hillary said her election was stolen. Trump said his election was stolen. And the FBI and the CIA have interfered in both. And who could forget Wanda? Our sweet, sweet Wanda, who's been caught bullying and ballot harvesting all over Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Wanda, why did you stuff the ballots? Wanda, there's surveillance video of you stuffing the ballots. Do you have anything to say?
The suspicion people have involve the mail-ins. As Jimmy Carter himself found, mail-in ballots are ripe for fraud. And the new survey about the last election suggests it's more widespread than we realized. A new Heartland Rasmussen poll finds that 17% of people admit they voted in a state where they don't live. 21% admitted they filled out someone else's ballot. and 8% admitted they were offered money to vote. Primetime just reported a case in Massachusetts where a candidate was driving voters to a polling precinct and then handing them cash after they voted for him. In Arizona, there were faulty voting machines in Maricopa County for Kari Lake's election, and allegations of delayed voting in Republican strongholds. We watched it with our own eyes. In Philly, poll observers claim they were held back. They couldn't see the ballots until the court stepped in. All of these shenanigans keep happening with Democrats. And now voters are confessing to pollsters there were shenanigans, all right. So how do we clean this up before the next election so we don't experience deja vu? Florida Secretary of State Cory Byrd has cleaned up his state system, and he joins us now. So how do we tighten this thing up?
Yeah, the best thing for states to do is follow Florida's lead. If you look at the 2020 election, we're the third largest state in the country, and we had results of what happened in Florida. We could predict or tell you who the winner was within 2.5 hours of the polls closing. But even though we had a great election in 2020, the state didn't rest on our laurels. Under Governor DeSantis' leadership, we banned ballot harvesting. We've banned drop boxes. We've banned Zuckerbucks. We've created the Office of Election Crimes and Security, where we are going after and prosecuting people for election fraud.
What about the fact that there's zillions of these mail-in ballots and they're just all over the ecosystem, and there's people going into nursing homes and apartment complexes? How do you allow people to vote by mail but also prevent the fraud?
Sure. So what we did in Florida is after the 2022 general election, all mail ballot requests were canceled in Florida. So anybody who now wants to vote in the 2024 election is going to have to send in a new request. So we don't have these legacy requests for people who've been on the books for years. They've all been canceled. So we're starting fresh and making sure that those people who are requesting a vote by mail ballot, that we're validating who they are. We've tightened up restrictions on what types of residences and places where those vote by mail ballots can be forwarded to. We've put in the deadlines of when those ballots have to be returned. So in other states, they only have to be postmarked by Election Day. In Florida, that vote by mail ballot has to be in by the time the polls close on Election Day, or it doesn't count.
Good. And I'm sure the Democrats are hysterical about it, which means, well, I think we know exactly what that means. Cord, thank you.